Parenting for the Everyday, a podcast dedicated to meeting parents in the trenches of parenthood. We explore how our faith fits into our parenting. With the help of our guests, we are seeking practical tips on how the gospel can speak into our day-to-day parenting. From the easy stuff to the hard stuff, we want to talk about it all.
This is Parenting for the Everyday. I'm Holly Dyke-Andrew.
And I'm Becca Alvarez.
And today we have Sarah in the studio with us today talking about actually one of our most requested topics. Anytime we say, what do you want to hear about? Sibling rivalry and arguing between siblings always comes up. So yeah, that is what's on the topic that's on the agenda for today. And we're going to talk about, what it is.
And
all three of us are such experts at this thing that we're going to talk about. It's great.
No, I think it'll be good. Let's start out with just when we say sibling rivalry, if we can actually say the word.
It's good.
What do we mean?
I feel like the first thing that comes to my mind is kind of competition, wanting to one-up each other, and that often leads to fighting. I think that comparison, I think of a lot with sibling rivalry. What do you
I automatically just go to arguing, fighting.
Yeah.
That could be totally off base, but when I think sibling rivalry, I think fighting.
Which probably is like don't you think, a symptom of maybe some of the stuff that Becca was talking about. I think it's the same. When I think about sibling rivalry, wow, why is that hard to say? Is it all the R's?
It is harder than it looks.
Okay. I think it's even based in that idea of okay, it's our siblings, it's our family, and we always speak in a way or act in a way that we're very secure in our relationships with these people, so everything feels over-exaggerated. Yeah, the way that, when I think about some of the fights, and sometimes physical, that I got in with my sisters, I am sort of embarrassed. Especially because it's about really dumb things like clothes or whatever. But I do think that the idea of sibling rivalry gets more intense because of even the family dynamic and that relationship, right? That wouldn't necessarily exist with peers or friends outside of that.
Well, yeah, because the gloves are off. You can say exactly what you think. They've seen you in all your glory, all the ways. And so you're just going to say what you think. Do you guys think it's realistic to say that you can eliminate it? So can you have a household where there is no sibling rivalry?
What's interesting is I feel like I grew up in a household that we actually didn't have very much fighting, but I think we probably still had quite a bit of sibling rivalry. So I don't know. That's eliminating a part of it.
We talk about that, though. Well, give an example of what you mean by that.
I think, and I don't know, this could be, I'm quite a bit younger than my siblings, so I'm 8 years younger than my brother and 6 years younger than my sister, and so a realistic fight between us wasn't really in the cards growing up. I think that probably became more realistic as we got older, but there was still quite a bit of this, probably on my end, trying to keep up and wanting to compare. So I remember, Rachel's not going to love this, but I remember being pretty young and I was a pretty good runner, and my dad would ride his bike next to me and I would run. And I remember I beat her cross country time when I was 11 or 12, quite a bit younger. And the first thing I did when I got home was run to her room and say, hey, I just beat your PR. Oh, it did not. In my head, I don't think I was being as rowdy as I actually was. But in
I was going to
hindsight,
ask you, in your head, did you do it because you were like, I actually want to annoy her? Or we were like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of myself. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there was a bit of a naivete there. It did not go over well. But I think there was, even though I wanted her to maybe be proud of me, I think there was a part of me that felt like, ooh, I'm growing up and getting bigger and being able to compete in this arena, which would still, I think, fall under that category of rivalry.
Yeah. I think that's where it gets complicated, because when I look at my 4 kids, when we've had those instances, it really does come out of a desire, it feels like, from the kid who either is the one who's going and telling the brother or sister about it, of I actually want to be accepted. I want you to be proud of me too. I want us to have this, but it's interpreted by usually the other sibling as like,
Rightly
okay,
so.
yeah,
Rightly
like,
so.
right, like, okay, you're bragging,
Good for you.
yeah, good for you, or yeah, it feels arrogant, all of these kind of things where when you ask the question, is it realistic to, eliminate it?
Yeah.
I do think there is this sense of like trying to foster within our kids this idea of okay, we're like being proud of each other and enjoying the ways in which God has created each of us with different talents and abilities, and being able to enjoy that with one another and celebrate those things. So I think that is a way where you can do that. I think it gets really hard when siblings are competing in same sports
Yes.
or hobbies or whatever it is. If your kids are really different from each other, then I think that can happen more naturally.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I don't think you can eliminate it. I think that's important to say, because I think as moms, we carry guilt when like, oh man, our kids are fighting. We're terrible moms. But I do think there are ways to have healthy sibling relationships. Right. But I don't know that it's realistic to say like, my kids never fight. They always get along. They always root for each other. They see the best in each other. But I do think it's an opportunity to build some of those qualities. So maybe like, let's talk about like negative wise. What would you say when we know it's an unhealthy level? So we've talked about the expectation is it's going to exist. So now let's set the expectation of when is this a red flag that this is not good.
I think for me is when it actually becomes like it really affects either both or one sibling, where it's actually kind of eating away at their soul a bit, where it feels like the rivalry has intensified to a point where it's destructive. I think I have a similar situation where I have 3 older children who are similar to age, and then I have a child who's 7 years younger. And so I don't think I'm breaking any confidences, but her older sister and her, like, it's really hard sometimes. And I have had to actually go to my oldest daughter and say, hey, this is actually how you're treating your sister is actually affecting her in a really hurtful way. Like, this is hurting her feelings. This is like, we've gone past,
this is
like,
deeper.
This is deeper than just a simple rivalry or an annoyance or whatever it is that you think in your head. And part of that is because you guys are very different, right? And so how she receives that and how you intended it is very different. But that is my responsibility, I think, to go to her, especially if it's something she's unaware of, and say that. That's where I think it crosses the line, where it's actually like it's destroying a relationship between these 2 siblings or multiple siblings, whatever it is. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that's a good gauge, is how much is it impacting even the family as a whole.
Yeah.
I think that when sibling rivalry gets to the place, and even if you unintentionally encourage it as a parent, gets to a place where it's really starting to damage the tapestry of the family as a whole. I think that parents, I say unintentionally, is I think that I am a mom of 2 boys, and so it's an easy comparison game to play right from the get-go. And I even have other people do that pretty quickly. And when that happens, I think there's a temptation to, oh, you guys can play each other in sports and we can always have you against each other and, it'll help you guys get better. But when you do that, I think you set a framework that can be difficult and get to that unhealthy level quicker. I think trying to keep your little people as individual as possible, as long as possible, and help them see the value of being individual and the talents of being individual. Because all kids are going to be so different, even growing up in the same environment.
Yeah, and Sarah, I know you can relate to this, but as a twin mom, there's even another complicated,
two twin
moms
moms
here.
know.
2 twin
But
moms.
and actually, yours is probably even more complicated
boys.
layer than me, because I have different genders.
Right.
So in some ways, they're obviously different. But there has still been a huge amount of intentionality that I probably missed opportunities to have, but have been like, oh wow, okay, let's make sure. A lot of times they're referred to as one unit, and so how does that create then tension between them? And so I just think there's another layer of intentionality that has to happen with twins.
I think so too. I think this is something that in God's probably graciousness and knowing how how I wouldn't, like, motherhood wouldn't come, like, super easy to me. So I had my boys, who are now 21, first, because it was, like, immediate from the get-go of, like, okay, the comparison game or whatever. And it was something that God allowed me to be like, hey, these are two very different human beings, although weirdly enough, their DNA is, like, the same. But they could not be more different.
Well, yours is so unique because they're mirror twins, right?
Yes, they're mirror twins, identical mirror twins. And so I think in the beginning it was hard because you're kind of like, but their personalities come so quickly. It's like Noah was always the first to do things and Jacob was like, whatever, man, like, good for you. But as they grew and got older, it was really neat to see how different they were. And it was such a good reminder to me of, like, yes, really encourage who they are as individuals. And we really, like you said, had to do that with a lot of intentionality at home because, like, when they were in school or things like that, I mean, people all the time are like, wait, Noah or Jacob. And just, you're right, they lumped them together as one unit. And they would even say, even in high school, that people would just call them coons. Because they're like, well, I'm not sure which one. And honestly, like, twin thing is a whole nother, like, podcast. But that was really hard for them, especially in high school where you're trying to, like, really assert yourself as, like, this is who I am or kind of my personality. And they could not have even been more different in high school. So I think, just recognizing that in your own kids, no matter if they're twins or not, like, really valuing who they are as individuals and speaking, like, life into that. Like, yes, God has created you as his image bearer and you're so unique in that, but, like, look at the ways that God has given you, like, these talents or abilities or, the personality traits, whatever that is. I think that's really important as parents for us to do that, because if we're doing that, then they're going to be able to recognize that in their siblings, and be able to also be like, that's really cool that you love art or you love basketball. I don't care. Or that you are such a compassionate, kind person. Yeah. Those are the things,
like,
I think.
Finding the things that make them unique. Okay, let's pause and look back. You have kind of already said a little bit of what your sibling dynamic was, but what were some things that that your parents maybe did really well, or some things that you noticed, like, oh, maybe there's a little bit of unhealth here, just reflecting on your own experience with your siblings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, again, because my situation was so unique, being the youngest so significantly, there were some complications with that. I was the youngest, but I'm also a little bit of an only child and a little bit of an oldest child, based if we get into any sort of birth order stuff.
That's coming. We're doing a separate podcast.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Shameless plug. But I think that did I had a lot of one-on-one time with my mom, which was incredible. But that can be difficult when you're talking about sibling relationships. So my siblings would go to school and I get to kind of play with mom and hang out with her. And so there were different aspects. I was always along for the ride. So I feel like I cheered. This is going to sound so bad. I had the opportunity to cheer them on really well, but by the time I was reaching kind of accolades, they were gone and in college. And so I think that our relationships look different in that instance. And so it's just then in adult years, I think, trying to be creative in how to get to know each other and how to be each other's best fans and stuff like that. Something that my brother does is he listens to this podcast the moment it comes out, texts me every Wednesday when it comes out, and that makes me feel like very seen and loved and cared for, especially from a sibling, which I think is pretty rare.
Yeah. And you guys were all girls and close together.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
Yeah.
Different than her situation?
Yeah, quite a bit. I'm the middle too, which is just, again, birth order. It's a whole thing. So my older sister, Stephanie, is just 1.5 years older than me. And then my younger sister, Katie, is 3 years younger. And yeah, I mean,
So 3 girls in 4 years.
Yeah. I was really intense. I was very dramatic. It was a lot. I feel bad for my parents, honestly, when I think about it. I think my parents, if I think back, I'm like, I know they were doing the best they could. I think it's just hard to navigate that and control it, especially when you do have a child who's very obstinate and strong-willed into things. And I just remember, I feel like, because I didn't probably have the language around it when I was younger, I totally bullied Stephanie. Like, I'm serious. I was the worst. I know.
Stephanie.
And Stephanie was like the people pleaser, like all that kind of stuff. And then Katie, that was a weird dynamic with the younger sister, because I think like she really wanted to be like with us, but it kind of felt like, well, you're just young enough that you're not in our stage. But then she had a lot of like really athletic ability and I didn't. And so I was like, I don't really, I can't like share that with you or understand that. But I will say, I think the light at the end of the tunnel on some of this is that I'm really close with my sisters. So I think it's something that I probably just didn't have enough maturity, and a lot of other things to really appreciate it at the time. But I do think the one thing my parents did a really good job is just saying like, hey, this is your sisters. Like this is a relationship that will never go away. Like, don't take it for granted. Don't treat it poorly. And so that is something I do remember. And I do think our parents, we spent a lot of time together as a family. And so we laugh, and I do this with our family now, Force Family Fun Time, there is something to be said about creating that environment with your kids.
Yeah, no, I really agree.
Yeah, sorry. I would just say that too. We had summer vacations that I think were really important because I never got the chance to go to school with my siblings because they were so much older. And so there wasn't a ton of time spent together except for summer vacations when we were all together, non-negotiable. No friends came, like it was just our family. And I think that was a really important thing for my particular family because of the age.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
What about for you?
Well, it's interesting. There are 5 years between all of my siblings, and actually 6 years between my brothers. So there's actually almost 11 years from me to Matthew, to the youngest, and so and I'm the only girl. So it is a completely and the oldest. Yeah. So different dynamic, but I was just going to echo what you guys are saying. I think my parents were really intentional about us spending time together. So. And like we show up for each other. So it was like, hey, we went to every sporting event or every, whatever it was in, we all went and, we were present and we were cheering each other up. And then what's really cool to see as an adult is that I think that has still really become a part of our lives. And so even both of my brothers live across the country from me or, not close. And so this idea of like, oh yeah, we're going to show up, you're graduating from law school. I'm on a plane.
Yeah. You guys do that really well.
You guys are in Chicago for something, I'm driving to make sure that I see you. And so, but I think what that was fostered is this idea of like, hey, you can't control a lot, but you can control that you show up for each other. And so that was something that I have then taken from my parents and tried to implement with my own kids of like, hey, we always show up, for each other.
I'm going to cross stitch that on a pillow. You can't control a lot, but you can always show up.
Do you cross stitch?
No, I don't. I don't, nor do I have time.
Great.
So,
great.
Okay, but eventually, maybe someone who's listening can cross stitch that on a pillow for Becca.
I can send my address in the show notes.
So let's even like go. So what are you doing? Like I kind of mentioned, that's one thing that I'm doing in my home is that my kids go to each other's sporting events and and it's not always sportings. I keep saying that, but that's not always the case of what it is. And it's not an optional activity. So it is something that everybody will go to with reason. Of course, there's things that come up. And like, I hope this isn't too controversial, but like, no, you can't bring a book and read there. You have to watch and you have to cheer so that you can be able to say like, hey, I was here, I was present. And it's funny because my kids are kind of spaced out. And so my little ones have showed up and now it's switched where my little ones are starting to have activities. And you better believe my high schooler, I'm like, come on, we're going to see, this is get in the car, we're going to the spring concert. Yeah. He's like, do I have to? I'm like, yeah, with a smile on your face. And so, just trying to foster this idea that this is the unit you've given and how do you kind of dive into that. But what else are you guys doing in your homes to encourage healthy relationships?
Yeah, I said some of these already, but we, like you, Holly, we really have tried to foster this idea of like, we really celebrate each other and the things that we do. And my kids are a variety of things. My one son is very much into theater and all of the things. And so I know a lot of musicals and plays and all kinds of things I never thought I would know about. But I'm not the only person in my family that knows that, right? So do all of their siblings. And even as he's like going into his senior year of college, he's 21 years old, we will go to Grove City and watch these. And you better believe Naomi's in the car going with us. If another sibling is home from a break, they're also going. And usually what's great is now it's not a, do I have to go? It's like, oh, you guys are going. Oh, great. I'm going to come with you. And so it definitely gets more challenging as your kids get older. And especially, like, Becca, you've even noted this, like your siblings were out of the house by the time you were doing that. And so finding creative ways for siblings to be part. But like even this past spring, Jacob was home for like 4 days, but Naomi had a track meet, and you better believe he was there for that track meet, for her to watch that. So like, it's actually really cool to see kind of some of those seeds you've planted grow. And like you said, you've even doing that with your siblings now, like this continues to be a priority for them. So I think one of the things we've also encouraged, especially our older 3 kids, is really being like, hey, share with each other, like what's going on, like take videos or pictures of what's going on at school and sharing those with your siblings. So like we always have, like Dad and I have scheduled time with you each week to like FaceTime and hear all that stuff. And we get to go and do a lot of these things. But continue to, what is so awesome is when we're FaceTiming them and we're like, oh, yeah, I've already talked to Jacob about this and Hannah, and they know. And I'm like, that just warms my heart, because it's like, okay, you're doing that without me saying, tell your brother what's going on or whatever. So, and I think with Naomi being our youngest and so far ahead, but they really want to show up for her as much as they can, because they get that time. But another thing is doing the whole, like having those conversations of going, hey, these relationships, this is for keeps. And so as much as we want to say, oh, we don't need to worry about how I treat my brother or sister or whatever, like you really do, like this is probably one of the few relationships you probably should put a lot of time and effort and intentionality around. And so we've done that by modeling it. And so now as we see them growing up and seeing them want to be part of that, I think this was seen for me and in the most emotional, intense way. It was a few weeks ago. My twin sons realized that this would be the last time they saw each other for a very long time, and sat and embraced each other and started sobbing in front of me and just...
So you're crying too at this point.
Of course. And it's a very raw emotional thing, but it's because they love each other so much and they are going to miss being part of each other's lives. Yeah. And not that it's forever or anything like that, but it was like, that wasn't manufactured by me. Yeah. So I think it's kind of like parenting in general. It's like the hard work. You put in the hard work and you get to see how that fleshes itself out as they get older.
Yeah. And Becca, I'll be curious to hear, your boys are really little, so there's no sporting events yet. There's not these kinds of things. But here's another practical thing that probably Ezekiel could start to do, not with words, but with pictures. My friend Jess, she has 4 kids, and one of the things she does is each of her kids have a different color Post-it note.
Oh my gosh, I love this idea.
Yeah, and they each, so like one is yellow, one is pink, one is blue or whatever, and they just write each other notes, and they stick it on the other sibling's door. It might be like, good job at this, or I miss you, or have a good day. And it's kind of a game for them, but it's really cool, I think, to be building in this idea of like, hey, encourage each other. Hey, show up for each other. Hey, be there. Hey, be a voice of love. Be a voice of, I'm in your corner. And I've loved that idea of being able to kind of remind each other like, hey, yeah, if your sibling did something good, like go tell them, and making that a part of a regular rhythm and routine.
I do love that. Yeah, like you mentioned, my kiddos are younger. I've got a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old. And I was really nervous when I was pregnant with Malachi, because we knew he was going to be a boy, and having 2 boys, the second born boy is typically more of a risk taker and often compared, and it can just be hard. And so I was really, really nervous about it, and I wasn't sure how it was going to impact Ezekiel and my whole pregnancy. I was just anxious. I don't know if there are other moms that feel that way when they were pregnant with their second, but I was. And so I did a lot of different research of like, how are we going to make this transition work, and how can I not disrupt Zeke's life too much when this baby comes? And so when Malachi was born, I was really, really intentional with my language. And so even if I had to spend time with him, I would try my best to never say like, Zeke, I can't do that right now because Malachi needs this, or because I need to be with baby. I would try to use something else so that he never felt like mom can't be with me anymore and it's this kid's fault. Which I think is easy. Like that's an easy connection to make because this little 2-year-old, all of a sudden there's a whole nother human in his life and he doesn't understand. And so I think that has been really, really helpful. We also didn't really disrupt hardly at all Zeke's life. Like we were on the go quickly and Malachi was a champ with it. And so they have even really, really early on formulated a really good, sweet relationship. And Malachi thinks that Zeke is the coolest person in the world and smiles and it's
so
very,
what
very
language
cool.
Would you so you said you wouldn't say this. I think that's a really practical thing, even
I do
as
too.
like my kids are 8, but even being able to say that. So what kind of language would you use instead of I can't do it because of him?
So I would normally try to like divert in some way if he wants to play and say I'm a nursing mom, and so if I have to nurse, then we would put a pause on that. Like we can't do that right now, but what we can do is this, and try to give him another option, or trying to do things in a way that it would still be exciting for him, have treats ready for him when I knew it was going to be a time that I couldn't be with him and had to be with Malachi. And then the times that I could be with Zeke, I was like all in, and trying to not be distracted. And so really putting forth the effort to still have intentional time with him, knowing that the majority of my time would be with my newborn.
Yeah. Has anybody ever done, like you put them in the same shirt, or you like
force
have
the
you heard
hug?
that? No, yeah, like force the hug, or I've not done that. I have separated my kids like on opposite sides of the room when they've been arguing, but they have to look at each other, but they can't talk to each other. And of course it ends in giggling, which kind of like resolves it a little bit. I'm not sure that that's a suggestion.
And then
it's more my desperation. But.
You're the mom too that if they're fighting, you'll send them to separate rooms too, right? That they can't spend time together.
I think that is specific to the fact that that I have twins, and my twins are never apart from each other by their choice at this point in time. So if they are necessarily having a hard time, we're like, hey, everybody needs a reset. Everybody needs their own space for a minute. And usually when they're in their space resetting, like, hey, we're going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Everybody needs to go. Because I do think that we get overstimulated. And we need a break from people. And forcing the hug, and even like
that's
this
another,
is a hot thing,
yeah.
but I also like in the middle of it wouldn't be like, hey, you hit him, you did this up, you need to do this right now, apologize right now, say this right now. So it's like, take 10 minutes. Okay, now we've reset, how do we make it right? Do you need to apologize? You probably do need to apologize. But sometimes I think in the heat of the moment and the heat of the argument, that's not the best time because the apology is not genuine. And then what are we teaching our kids? Like, oh, well, we checked the box, we apologize. And the other one said, I forgive you. And it's like, well, I don't know that we're there yet. Yeah. So kind of working through like, time out, regroup.
Yeah, I was going to say, it really is okay. Like, I think we're talking about how to foster these relationships. And so I think we're leaning into some of that. But it is absolutely good and right for siblings to want to have their own space, to spend time alone. Like, I think we sometimes can get a little panicky when it's like, why does my one child want to be in their room by themselves? Like, I think that's pretty normal. Like, I think they just need some alone time. And so I think that's okay too. I think there's just, obviously you don't want your child alone in their room for 8 hours a day or anything like that. But I think it is okay. And again, different kids, different needs, but I definitely have a child who definitely needs that alone time to just decompress. And if they don't get it, it's bad for everybody, So I think it's just knowing your kids too.
Yeah, another friend of mine, if you are having like a play date or you have plans with friends, if you are not able to treat your siblings with respect, then you don't get to go to those plans. And her mindset is like, hey, we have to learn how to treat our house well. And if we're not doing that well, we're not ready to bring somebody else into it. And so I thought, wow, that's pretty good and impactful to know like, hey, it starts at home, it starts here. And if this is broken, then we can't go out, because that's just going to kind of continue on. So I thought that's another good kind of practical one. So I think I feel like I want parents to leave knowing like, hey, it's going to happen.
It's normal.
Yeah, it's normal. And also even being encouraged with like, hey, the hard work that you're doing now that maybe you don't see, they're not best friends right now. They don't, want to spend every waking moment together. That isn't necessarily always the truth, that later they will still have, like a bond with the work that you're doing here and whatever that shape looks like.
Yeah. And also want to make it known that my children are not perfect, that Zeke did jump on Malachi's head yesterday. So they do still fight.
Deserved it.
They do still fight. He's pretty close to being perfect. But
I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
But even in those instances, like you said, it's kind of like starting at grassroots, and we stopped everything and had Zeke apologize, and like trying to, even in his own little mind, know that baby's smaller than him and he has to be careful, and giving him a lot of pride in being the big brother, but then also trying to create those individual lives early on. It's tough.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to say?
I guess I want moms to know too, like, you're probably doing better than you think. That fighting is a really tough thing, and it's easy to be your worst self in fighting also, because it is so overstimulating, and it's the two or more people that you care about the most that are fighting with each other, and that is a different type of pain.
Even adding on to that, like your own sense of like when you have conflict, your kid's watching you resolve it, whether it's with your spouse or with a different kid. If your kids are watching you apologize, watching you make it right, watching you learn how to grow from that, they're going to pick up on that with each other too.
100%. And give yourselves grace.
It's a lot of grace.
Get a nice coffee. That's all I have to say.
Okay, great.
This has been Parenting for the Everyday. Tune in next time.